year, almost 200 people died of overdoses of heroin.
Crimes of violence in America will double by 1972. We cannot accept that kind of future for America.
In the late 1960s, America's inner cities were hit by a wave of violent crime, and heroin addicts became money for drugs.
There's no confusion or question as to what the driving force behind those sports was. Punishment, deterrent, not rehabilitation.
40 years and hundreds of billions of dollars later, the nation's prisons are packed with drug offenders. Heroin is now causing more deaths than car crashes or violent crimes. Death. Politicians responded with harsh penalties. The war on drugs was born. Politicians responded with harsh penalties. The war on drugs was born. And heroin is back. But the users
still look like a heroin addict.
and the response to the health issue of people dying are profoundly changed.
Previously, it was people in the inner city, it was those people.
But now, the lawmakers have a connection. Addiction is in their backyard. It's in their house. It's in their basement.
New York City has the worst narcotics problem in the country.
In the late 1960s and early 1970s, New York City struggled with high rates of heroin addiction and the crime that went with it. I was sicker. I was ill. I was sicker. I was ill. Politicians responded with harsh penalties. The war on drugs was born. Politicians responded with harsh penalties. The war on drugs was born. Under intense pressure, including from leading African-American politicians, New York State tried a variety of approaches, even forced treatment to solving the heroin problem.
Let's tell it like it is. We have achieved very little permanent rehabilitation.
Frustrated, in 1973, Nelson Rockefeller proposed the harshest drug laws in the nation.
The motivation for the governor was to be punitive. They said, let's tell it like it is. Now we have to have very tough penalties. Emphasis on penalties, which will deter drug use.
Former state senator John Dunn was one of the sponsors of the new laws.
The most serious provision in the law was mandatory incarceration for a term of imprisonment up to life for the sale of any amount greater than 1 ounce of heroin.
Politicians responded with harsh penalties. The war on drugs was born. Politicians responded with harsh penalties. The war on drugs was born. But New York was not the only city fighting a heroin epidemic. Washington, D.C. took a more medical approach.
We took urine samples from everybody who came into the jail. 44% of them were positive for heroin.
Dr. Robert DuPont started a treatment program at the Department of Corrections. It offered the city's addicts an experimental heroin replacement drug, methadone.
Methadone, a bitter, inexpensive synthetic drug that the city hopes most addicts will choose over a $50 a day heroin habit and all of the crime that goes with it.
Most of our patients, people from the criminal justice, we ended up treating 15,000 heroin addicts. Overdose deaths went from 70 a year to 4. The crime rate on a monthly basis was cut in half over that time.
The city's experience caught the attention of President Richard Nixon.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
In 1971, Nixon declared war on drugs, and methadone treatment was part of his plan.
Looking back at some of Nixon's policies, they were moving towards a public health approach, but that came to a screeching halt.
There were fresh needle marks in her left arm, and the coroner said she died of an overdose of drugs.
Heroin was all over the media. The public's fear grew. Tough New York-style drug laws and heavy mandatory sentences spread across the country.
In Washington, D.C.'s success with crime with methadone was overshadowed.
The politics said, let's get tough. The tougher you are, the more politically viable you're going to be, and that was more police, more prisons, longer sentences.
We are waging a war on drugs, and we are losing.
You're losing. Let's open up, we got a war here.
In 1988, frustrated by his city's raging drug problem, Baltimore Mayor Kurt Schmoke, a former federal prosecutor, began to openly challenge the lock-em-up approach.
It's not solving the problem. It's not getting to the answer. We're wasting millions of resources and millions of lives.
He even suggested decriminalization.
You weren't going to be able to prosecute your way out of addiction. If we went after it as a health problem, I think in the long run we'd get both a reduction in crime and a reduction in addiction rate.
His idea sparked a lot of debate, but went nowhere.
It's immoral, it's illegal, and it's not going to happen.
As the AIDS crisis hit, the stakes around heroin grew even higher.
By far the most common way heterosexuals get AIDS is through intravenous drug use.
There is an alarming new concentration of AIDS cases among inner-city blacks and Hispanics.
Hoping to save lives, started an experimental clean needle exchange.
You only could get AIDS through sexual intercourse or sharing needles.
Baltimore's HIV rate plummeted, then tried, without success, to convince the federal government to fund needle exchanges nationwide.
There were many people that just thought it was retreat in the war on drugs. We were, quote, sending the wrong signal.
A free needle exchange program is a free needle exchange for a felon.
The heroin problem was still perceived as an inner city problem, and to some people, just a problem of people of color. So you had all these representatives from districts that viewed the problem as those people, not our people.
Despite that perception, by then, the vast majority of new heroin users were white. The nation continued trying to punish away the drug problem, which also now included crack cocaine. But ironically, it turned out that back when New York passed its Rockefeller drug laws, the city's heroin crisis was already subsiding on its own.
Drug epidemics often burn themselves out rather quickly.
Although older addicts remained, there was a dramatic drop in new users. In Harlem, researchers found teenagers shunned heroin after observing its devastating impact.
drugs bought from peddlers costs an addict as much as $10,000 a year. This means that he pays out almost $30 every day. The peddler deals directly with the addicts. The drugs. The drugs. The drugs. For distribution. The drugs. The drugs. The drugs. For distribution. To avoid being caught with the drugs on his person, he keeps them in readily accessible hiding places. The peddler. 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 The drugs. Peddler drugs. The drugs. For distribution. The drugs. The drugs. The drugs. For distribution.
Of grave concern to people everywhere is the problem of drug addiction and the control of illegal drug traffic. Across boundaries and through seaports, under the cover of darkness, drug smugglers run the blockade of customs and police. The illicit traffic exceeds by far the lawful shipments needed by hospitals and the medical profession. To the criminal world, supplying the demand of drug addicts is big business. A single pound of opium bought in Bombay for $50 can fetch up to $900 at an American or Canadian port, and broken down for sale to drug addicts, $15,000. Traffic in drugs and the use of drugs is fostered by no one race. Drugs affect all races and all classes of people.
Crude and refined opium is brought in from producer countries. But pure opium is seldom used today. It is converted into other drugs in secret factories. The big demand is for these derivatives of opium, the narcotic drugs, useful in medicine to relieve pain and to induce sleep. Used without supervision, they can become dangerous, habit-forming drugs.
Once the habit is formed, the addict, taking his drugs in secret, must have a continual supply at all costs. But lawfully imported drugs are not available to him. He must turn to an illegal source. He must have his drugs several times a day, or he suffers painfully. As he gets used to the drug, his need increases. And when he can no longer afford to supply himself, he tries a cure or pleads for a jail sentence.
In jail, he is perfectly well without drugs after a period of sickness. Without a jail, he always returns to them, often against his will. And the vicious circle of pleasure and pain begins again.
Today I'm going to cover the effects of heroin. Of course, there's positive effects, otherwise people wouldn't bother taking it. Those effects are euphoria, and the person feels pain-free. Euphoria, and the person feels
What happens is when the drug wears off, each time the drug wears off, these effects come back down on the person a little bit harder.
Muscle aches, muscle spasms, headaches, nausea, respiratory problems, depression.
Several times a day, the addicts meet with their peddler. Since the last meeting, they have been busy raising enough cash for the next dose. Theft, directly attributable to drug addiction, causes a staggering annual loss to legitimate business. For no job will pay for the drugs an addict must have every few hours.
Should be made a crime, that the addict should not be permitted to destroy himself and infect his community, that fear of punishment is a deterrent to crime and would reduce the number of addicts. Others say the use of drugs is an expression of weakness, that in itself would never be considered criminal. But addiction is an illness, and treatment in proper institutions is the only solution. Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: addiction and crime go hand in hand. Those who take cocaine are dangerous to themselves and to others. The drug is not so habit-forming as the opiates, but it induces physical discomfort, distorted ideas, and hallucination. drug habit often starts through association with addicts. These are the drug addicts. They form a coherent group in every large city. They are known to the police. Almost all of them have long records. Not necessarily for narcotic offenses, but through the constant criminal activity which pays for the drugs they must have. These drug addicts. These drug addicts. These drug addicts. These drug addicts. Drugs bring little real pleasure, but the addict needs them just to feel normal. Feel normal. Pleasure. Normal. Pleasure. Pleasure. Normal. Addict. Pleasure. Normal. Addict. Feel real pleasure. Addict. Feel real pleasure. These drug addicts. These drug addicts. These drug addicts. These drug addicts. Addiction is not confined. Addiction is not confined to the criminal class.
Some have turned to drugs in times of personal stress and have become unable later to do without them.
Others have been addicted to drugs prescribed during illness. Addict. This is a constant concern of medical authorities, aware of the dangers of the opiates. Addict. These drug addicts. 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 Addict.
You've been on heroin a long time. 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 People think of addiction as a psychological phenomenon. It is not a psychological phenomenon. There is a psychological component to it. It affects the brain. You've been on the brain. You've been on the brain. You've been on heroin a long time. You've been on heroin a long time.
The thalamus, the hypothalamus, the cingulate gyrus, the hippocampus. There's a lot of different structures that all make up the limbic system.
Differentiate us as humans with emotion and impairs your ability to regulate behaviors, emotional processing. It impairs your memory. It impairs executive functioning, reasoning skills, problem-solving skills, planning skills. It impairs your memory. It impairs your memory. It impairs your memory. It decreases your ability to make decisions. It decreases your ability to imagine future events and interactions. It decreases your ability to respond to stressful situations.
All of these things, in fact, a heroin brain functions a lot like an Alzheimer's brain.
Out of all the melodies, oh, you're the sweetest love song.
So that means motivation and emotion are pretty much gone. You know, this prefrontal cortex here is the executive center. This is like the administrative office that tells you what to do. It's your problem-solving center. It's what organizes all of your behavior. It's problem recognition, problem-solving, and then these deep structures in here make up the limbic.
This is deep brain. Deep brain. Right. 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 Deep brain. Right, deep brain. Right, deep brain. Right. Deep brain. Right, 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 deep brain. Right.
It needs to do.
speechless. And when she lets me slip, 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 and when she lets me slip.
Siblings and cousins or peers, people who witness it from very close hand, take note. By the time you are of age to really think about that experimentation, you've already seen negative consequences.
But this trend made little difference to the public and had little impact on the escalating war on drugs and crime.
As the heroin epidemic was petering out, we brought in these laws. There's something very sad about that. In that we set in motion this whole system for over a generation that perhaps was not necessary.
For John Dunn, the harsh drug laws he helped pass were turning out to be a mistake.
My conversion originated really based in civil rights issues.
In 1990, Dunn went to Washington to serve in the Department of Justice.
I was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, which led me to visit a number of federal prisons. I was shocked to find the number of inmates who were there really as a result of criminal laws such as we had enacted in the 70s.
Dunn saw that inner city drug users and small-time dealers, mostly young African-American men, filled the nation's jails.
It was relatively easy to pick drug sellers off the street where the trade was going on. Those who were engaged in non-violent, drug-related crimes really constituted the vast proportion of those who were being sent to prison. The rate and relative percentages of incarceration among minority communities has had a devastating effect. The rate and relative percentages of incarceration among minority communities has had a devastating effect.
After he left the Justice Department, Dunn returned to New York to try to reverse the harsh drug laws he had helped pass.
The number of heroin users has nearly doubled in just the past 3 years.
It's been 40 years and billions of dollars since the last heroin epidemic. And the United States is again facing a heroin crisis.
Mary is 24 years old, 5 months pregnant, and hooked on heroin.
In the 1970s, it was an inner city problem, and it was a young man of color. It's not that now. It's equally men and women, and it's primarily white.
Authorities say the heroin surge is directly linked to the widespread abuse of prescription painkillers in this country.
4 in 5 heroin users started out by misusing prescription drugs.
When I was around 14 years old, my mom was actually on pain medicine, and I had real easy access to it.
Joe Farmer is typical of what the media calls the new face of heroin. He's young, white, middle class, and lives in a rural town.
I started using heroin when I was 17. Someone told me, I can't get pills, but, I can get raw or heroin.
He was sent to Maryland's Washington County Detention Center on heroin-related theft charges. The jail was one of the first in the nation to offer medication-assisted treatment with a drug called Vivitrol.
We will get your Vivitrol shots here every month until you release.
Okay. You're not allergic to Band-Aids, tape, or anything like that?
Yes.
Unlike methadone, an opiate which replaces heroin, long-acting Vivitrol blocks heroin's effects.
Vivitrol works on your opiate receptors and it blocks them. It's just a shot you get every month and it just keeps you from getting high. It's just a shot you get every month and it just keeps you from getting high.
Rebecca Hogemeyer started the program in 2011. She believes Vivitrol will help newly detoxed addicts stay clean after they leave jail.
I was thinking they could offer this medication and you could reduce recidivism at the same time. We've been arresting them for how long and it hasn't helped. Has it made heroin addiction go away? Has it decreased the demand for heroin? No, it hasn't.
Why doesn't naloxone work? What happens is the heroin's in their body.
Washington County also started training police to use Narcan, a drug that stops overdoses in progress.
And then you're gonna...
In the last 2 years, over 30 states have implemented laws for Narcan. The whole United States has changed their perspective and are looking at addiction as a public health issue.
We must address it as a public health care crisis.
A public health issue.
My husband Frank and I buried a child to drug addiction. So, we must invest more in the treatment of drugs. Mike Pence is changing his stance on allowing needle exchanges to operate statewide.
Now, the lawmakers have a connection. That is where the compassion is.
Joe Farmer is grateful to be in jail at a time when the focus is on rehabilitation, not just punishment.
I know I'm at the point where I need to do this for myself and actually make something out of myself.
As for John Dunn's effort to help rescind the Rockefeller drug laws, it took over a decade, and there is now broad consensus that mass incarceration can't solve the nation's drug problems.
Part of what brought about a change is an awareness that punitive measures are not the answer, but also that it's happening to me, it's happening to us, it's happening to my family. It's happening to me, it's happening to us, it's happening to my family.
The lives that could have been saved, the families that would have remained intact. The war on drugs was pretty devastating to the United States, and hopefully we've seen the error of our ways and are going to move in a different direction.